A rancher noticed his horse vanished. The fence was crushed splintered like matchwood, so he followed the trail to discover what no one in town could have imagined. Under the blazing sun, the hoofprints led him to a canyon, where a frightened Navajo boy clutched the reins, begging for mercy and whispering about a dying sister. The rancher thought he'd found a thief. Instead, he found a secret that could tear his world in two, because this child carried more than sickness. She carried a claim to land the whole town wanted buried, as church bells toll and mob voices rise. The rancher must choose: protect his own blood and Namor, stand for two children everyone else has cast aside. The fence was broken. The horse was taken, but what he truly found was far more dangerous. Will one man's mercy be strong enough to stop a town's hate? Or will compassion cost him everything he has left? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button. For more. Dawn crept over the San Pedro River Valley, painting the sky in pale shades of purple and gold. Eli Harkness pulled his wool coat tighter against the morning chill as he stepped onto his front porch. The familiar sense of dust and mesquite filled his nostrils, carried on a crisp breeze that rustled through the cottonwoods. His weathered boots creaked on the wooden steps as he made his way to the barn. The morning routine was as familiar as breathing. Check the horses, inspect the fences, then head back for coffee before the real work of the day began. But something felt off this morning. A niggling worry at the back of his mind that he couldn't quite place. The barn door groaned on its hinges as he pushed it open. The horses nickered softly in greeting, all except one. Eli's eyes narrowed as he counted the stalls. Dustfire, his prized red gelding, was missing. Now that ain't right, he muttered, his heart beginning to pound. Dustfire never wandered off. Not in all the years Eli had owned him. He hurried through his morning checks of the north pasture, scanning the ground for signs. The sun was just beginning to peek over the eastern hills when he found a section of fence crushed nearly flat, as if something heavy had barreled right through it. Eli knelt to examine the tracks in the soft earth boot prints. Not the work of wild animals, then. His jaw clenched as he followed the trail with his eyes, noting the distinctive drag marks leading toward the canyon. Rustlers, the word left a bitter taste in his mouth. Back at the barn, he quickly saddled his bay mare, checking the cinch twice before swinging into the saddle. The rifle slid smoothly from its scabbard as he tested its weight. He didn't want trouble, but experience had taught him to be prepared for it all the same. The morning sun climbed higher as Eli followed the trail, reading the signs like a well-worn book. Whoever had taken Dustfire wasn't trying too hard to hide their tracks. Either they were mighty confident or they didn't know much about covering their trail. Both possibilities concerned him. The canyon walls rose steep and red on either side as he pushed deeper into the rough country. Birds called from the scrubby vegetation clinging to the cliffsides, and a lizard skittered across the sun-warmed rocks. The air grew warmer, but Eli barely noticed. His attention focused on the ground ahead. Near midday, he heard it, the familiar soft nicker of his horse. Eli drew rein, listening carefully. The sound came again, echoing slightly off the canyon walls. He dismounted, leading his mare quietly forward until he could peer around a bend in the rock. There, in a box canyon that dead-ended against a sheer cliff face, stood Dustfire. But what Eli saw next made him blink in surprise. No gang of hardened rustlers, just a single boy, thin as a rail and clearly Navajo by his dress, tugging gently at Dustfire's reins and speaking in soft, melodic tones. The boy couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, his clothes dusty and worn. There was something in his manner that gave Eli pause. The way he handled the horse spoke of respect, not the rough handling he'd expect from a thief. Still, a theft was a theft. Eli raised his rifle, stepping into view. "Hold it right there, boy," The young Navajo froze, his hands still on Dustfire's reins. Fear flashed across his face, but Eli noted there was something else there too: determination. Maybe even desperation. "I am Tahani," the boy said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "Please, I only borrowed your horse. My sister is very sick. I needed to reach help quickly." Eli kept the rifle trained on the boy, but his finger eased away from the trigger. There was truth in those eyes, he reckoned. The kind of truth that came from real need, not greed. "Your sister?" Eli asked, his voice gruff but less threatening. "Where is she?" "In a cave, not far," Tahani replied, gesturing toward the canyon's western wall. "She burns with fever." Our mother knew medicines, but his voice trailed off, thick with emotion. "She is gone now." "And our father?" The boy's words struck something deep in Eli's chest. Memories of his own losses rising unbidden. He'd known fever too, watched it take his Sarah 5 years ago, helpless to stop it. And their little one? Gone even before that. The rifle lowered slowly as Eli studied the boy's face. There was no malice there, just the desperate look of someone trying to protect what family they had left. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in deep orange and throwing long shadows across the ground. "You say she's close by?" Eli asked, his voice softer now. Tahani nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I only took your horse because he was the strongest I could find. I thought perhaps in town." "Town's a fair piece," Eli said, shaking his head. "And folks there, well, they ain't always kind to everyone who comes seeking help." He didn't need to elaborate. They both knew what he meant. A long moment passed as Eli considered his options. The right thing to do, the lawful thing, would be to take the boy in to the sheriff. But law and justice weren't always the same thing. His PA had taught him that. And something in this boy's desperate act spoke to the part of Eli that remembered what it was to be helpless while watching someone you loved suffer. "Show me," he said finally, securing his rifle back in its scabbard. "Show me where your sister is. Maybe between us we can figure something out." Relief flooded Tahani's face, though caution still lingered in his eyes. "You will help." "I reckon I will," Eli replied, gathering Dustfire's reins. "Can't rightly walk away now, knowing there's a sick child involved." He glanced at the darkening sky. "But we'd best move quick. Night comes fast in these canyons." As they prepared to ride, Eli couldn't help but notice how the boy handled himself around the horses, confident but gentle, showing a natural way with animals that spoke of good raising. Whatever circumstances had brought Tahani to stealing horses, Eli was becoming more certain it wasn't born of any natural inclination toward wrongdoing. The sun was settling toward the horizon as they mounted up. Tahani riding double behind Eli on Dustfire while they led the bay mare. As they picked their way carefully through the growing shadows, Eli found himself wondering what exactly he was getting himself into. But when he remembered the look in the boy's eyes when he spoke of his sister, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. Sometimes, he reflected, a man had to look past what was strictly right according to law and listen to what his conscience told him was right according to the higher laws of mercy and compassion. His Sarah would have understood that. She always did have a way of seeing straight to the heart of things. The canyon walls loomed above them, and somewhere ahead lay whatever challenge awaited with Tahani's sister. Eli didn't know what he'd find. But he knew one thing for certain. He was committed now, for better or worse. To seeing this through, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Eli and Tahani made their way across the parched landscape. Dustfire plodded behind them on a lead rope, his hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The boy rode beside Eli on his own mount, maintaining a watchful silence that spoke of years spent learning to be cautious around strangers. "How long has your sister been sick?" Eli asked, breaking the heavy quiet between them. His voice was gruff, but not unkind. Tohani's fingers tightened on his reins. 5 days now. The fever came sudden-like. At first, we thought it would pass. He paused, swallowing hard. But she gets weaker every day. The trail wound through thick stands of mesquite, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. A dry wash crossed their path, its sandy bottom cracked from months without rain. Eli watched as the boy navigated the terrain with the ease of someone who had grown up reading the land's subtle language. "Your father was a railroad man," Eli prompted, noting how the boy sat his horse with a mixture of native and Western style. "Yes, sir." "Surveyor for the new line." Tohani's voice caught slightly. "He taught me some reading and figures, showed me how to measure distances." His dark eyes clouded with memory. But the work was dangerous. "There was a rock slide last year." He didn't finish the sentence. "He didn't need to. And your mother?" Eli asked softly. "The fever took her too." "Same kind that's got Nita now." Tohani's shoulders hunched slightly as another cough racked his frame. But he straightened quickly, unwilling to show weakness. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's hooves marking time. Eli studied the boy from the corner of his eye, noting the proud set of his jaw despite the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The story was all too familiar in these parts, children caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The other children at the reservation, Eli ventured carefully. "They don't make it easy for you and your sister." Tohani's bitter laugh held no humor. "They call us half-bloods. Say we don't belong." He straightened in his saddle. "The white folk in town ain't much different. Reckon we don't belong there neither." The sun was low in the sky when they finally reached the makeshift camp. It was a sorry sight, just a lean-to fashioned from canvas stretched over mesquite poles, offering minimal protection from the elements. Eli's heart sank as he dismounted, knowing how bitter the nights could get in these parts. "She's in here," Tohani said, leading the way to the shelter's entrance. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his worry. The interior was dim and close. A small figure lay on a thin blanket spread over the packed earth. Eli had to duck to enter, his eyes adjusting slowly to the gloom. The girl Nita lay still, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her eyes were half open, but glazed. Showing no recognition of their presence, Eli knelt beside her, his weathered hand gentle as he felt her forehead. The heat radiating from her skin confirmed his fears. Without quinine, the fever would only grow worse. He'd seen it before. During his time working cattle drives, the way the illness could consume a person from the inside out. "Sir," Tohani's voice was barely above a whisper. Would you ride to the fort for medicine?" The boy's facade of strength cracked slightly, revealing the scared child beneath. "I tried yesterday, but the sergeant there," he trailed off. Blinking rapidly, Eli understood without needing to hear more. A lone native boy at the fort would have been turned away at best, arrested at worst. But a respected rancher might have better luck, assuming anyone discovered his errand. The sensible thing would be to refuse. Getting involved in Indian affairs was asking for trouble, especially with tensions running high over water rights and grazing boundaries. The neighboring ranchers would take a dim view of anyone seen helping outsiders, as if sensing his hesitation. Nita stirred on her palate, a soft moan escaping her cracked lips. The sound struck something deep in Eli's chest, bringing back memories he'd tried hard to bury. His wife, Sarah, in their bed, burning with fever, while he rode desperate miles for help that came too late. The small grave he'd dug beside their firstborns. The weight of the shovel almost unbearable in his hands. The evening shadows were lengthening outside the lean-to, painting the world in shades of purple and gold. In that moment, Eli could almost hear Sarah's voice, gentle but firm. the way she'd always been when pointing him toward the right path. Some risks are worth taking. Eli Harkness, she'd say, especially when a child's life hangs in the balance. He looked at Tohani, seeing not a Navajo boy or a half-blood, but simply a brother trying desperately to save his sister. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like stepping onto a path that had been waiting for him all along. "I'll ride to the fort," he said quietly. "First light tomorrow. The doctor there knows me, might be heal. Spare some quinine if I explain the situation right." The hope that bloomed in Tohani's eyes made something in Eli's chest ache. The boy drew himself up straight, struggling to maintain his dignity, even as relief threatened to overwhelm him. "Thank you," Tohani managed, his voice rough with emotion. "We ain't got much to pay with," but Eli held up a hand, stopping him. "We'll worry about that later. For now, let's see about making your sister more comfortable." He glanced around the sparse shelter. "I've got some blankets in my saddlebags and a canteen of fresh water. That'll help some until I can return with proper medicine," as they worked together to tend to Nita. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped onto a path that would change more than just these children's lives. But watching Tohani gently lift his sister's head to help her drink, Eli knew that whatever consequences came, he'd made the only choice his conscience would allow. The sun sank behind the western hills, painting the sky in deep oranges and reds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, Eli focused on the task at hand, helping a sick child through another night of fever. While her brother kept his lonely vigil beside her, dawn painted the eastern sky in soft bands of pink and gold as Eli and Tohani set out for Fort Crittenden. Dustfire's hooves kicked up small clouds of dust with each step, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The boy rode close to Eli's left side, shoulders tense but his eyes alert and watchful. The landscape stretched before them in a patchwork of rocky outcrops and scrubbling. Mesquite and prickly pear dotted the terrain, casting long shadows in the early light. The morning chill would soon give way to the merciless Arizona sun, and Eli knew they needed to make good time. "Fort's about 4 hours' ride," Eli said, adjusting his hat against the growing glare. "If we push steady, we can make it by midday." Tohani nodded, his face set with determination. "My sister is strong. She will hold on." His voice carried a tremor that betrayed his worry, despite the brave words. They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher. The horses' steady gait and the creak of leather saddles created a rhythm that marked their progress. Eli found himself studying the boy from the corner of his eye, noting how he sat his horse with natural grace despite his obvious exhaustion. Near mid-morning, they came upon a small creek cutting through a rocky draw. The water ran clear and cool, a blessing in the increasingly warm day. Eli reined his horse to a stop near the water's edge. "We'll rest here a spell," he announced. Let the horses drink and catch their wind, while the animals drank deeply from the creek. Eli reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside were dried beans, simple trail fare, but necessary sustenance. He offered a handful to Tohani, who accepted them with quiet thanks. They sat on sun-warmed rocks near the water's edge, the sound of the creek providing peaceful accompaniment to their meal. Tohani chewed slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Thought you would turn us away," the boy said suddenly, his voice low. "Most whites do. Or worse." Eli considered this as he took a drink from his canteen. "Reckon I might have once upon a time," he admitted. "But a man learns things, living out here. About what matters and what don't." Something shifted in Tohani's expression. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Eli found himself wanting to protect this boy and his sister, a feeling that caught him by surprise with its intensity. They mounted up again after the brief rest. pushing on as the sun climbed toward its zenith. The fort's adobe walls appeared on the horizon like a mirage, growing more solid as they approached. Eli felt Tohani tense beside him as they drew closer to the military outpost. 2 soldiers stood guard at the gate, their rifles held ready as they watched the approaching riders. Their expressions hardened when they saw Tohani. And Eli felt a familiar surge of frustration at such instinctive prejudice. "State your business," the taller guard called out, his hand resting meaningfully on his weapon. Eli sat straight in his saddle, meeting the guard's gaze steadily. "Name's Eli Harkness. I ranch the spread north of San Pedro River. Need to see the army doctor. Got an urgent matter requires his attention." The guards exchanged glances, their eyes sliding suspiciously to Tohani. "And the boy?" "He's with me," Eli said firmly. "Part of that urgent matter I mentioned?" A tense moment passed before the guards stepped aside, though their expressions remained wary. Eli and Tohani rode through the gate into the fort's dusty courtyard, where several soldiers paused in their duties to watch them pass. The infirmary occupied a long, low building near the center of the fort. Its whitewashed walls gleamed in the midday sun, and the smell of carbolic acid drifted through its open windows. Eli dismounted and tied both horses to the hitching post, gesturing for Tohani to follow him inside. The army doctor, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his desk as they entered. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Tohani, but years of military service had taught him to maintain a professional demeanor. Dr. Eli began, removing his hat. "I've got a sick child, needs help. The boy's sister, she's down with fever. Been 5 days now. Getting worse by the hour." Tohani stepped forward, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "She shivers even in the heat. Her skin burns like fire, but she says she feels cold. Sometimes she doesn't know where she is." The doctor's expression grew grave as he listened. He asked several questions about the symptoms, which Tohani answered carefully, translating some details from his sister's Navajo descriptions of her illness. A heavy silence filled the room after they finished speaking. The doctor removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly with a cloth from his desk. "Sounds like malaria," he said finally. "Not uncommon in these parts, especially near the river bottoms." He stood and walked to a large cabinet against the wall, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. "I can give you quinine," he said, reaching for a small brown bottle. "But you should know, there's some in town won't take kindly to helping a half-breed child, even a sick one." Eli's jaw tightened at the casual cruelty of the words, but he kept his voice level. "Much obliged for the medicine, doctor." "That's all we came for." The doctor nodded, adding 2 clean blankets to the bottle of medicine. "Give her the quinine every 4 hours, even through the night. Keep her cool if you can." If the fever doesn't break in 3 days, he left the sentence unfinished. But his meaning was clear. As they turned to leave, a sergeant appeared in the doorway, his face hard with disapproval. "Getting mighty peculiar company for a rancher." "Harkness," he said, the words heavy with implied threat. "Some might wonder where your loyalties lie." Eli met the sergeant's gaze steadily. "My loyalties to what's right, Sergeant. Always has been." He placed a protective hand on Tohani's shoulder, guiding him past the soldier and out into the courtyard. They mounted up quickly, the precious medicine secured in Eli's saddlebag. The setting sun painted the western sky in deep reds as they rode away from the fort, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Neither spoke for several miles, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events and what lay ahead. The medicine gave them hope, but Eli couldn't shake the sergeant's words or the doctor's warning. He'd lived in the territory long enough to know that helping these children could cost him dearly among his neighbors. Yet watching Tohani's careful handling of his horse, seeing the worry and love for his sister written clearly on his young face, Eli knew he'd made the right choice. They pushed their horses as much as they dared in the failing light, eager to return to the sick girl with their life-saving cargo. The desert night was beginning to settle around them, bringing with it the first evening stars and the distant cry of a coyote. The moon hung like a silver coin in the night sky as Eli's party finally approached his ranch. Dustfire's hooves dragged wearily in the dirt, matching their own exhaustion. Nita lay bundled in Eli's coat, her small form cradled carefully in his arms, while Tahani rode beside them, fighting to keep his eyes open after the long journey. Through the darkness, a warm yellow glow spilled from the windows of Clara Benson's cabin next door. The sight of it sparked hope in Eli's chest. If anyone could help them now, it would be Clara. She had a way with the sick that went beyond mere knowledge of remedies. "Wait here with your sister," Eli told Tahani as he dismounted carefully. Still holding Nita, "I'm going to speak with Mrs. Benson." The boy nodded, though his eyes never left his sister's face. Eli crossed the short distance to Clara's door, his boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. He shifted Nita's weight gently and knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open. Clara stood in the lamplight, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night air. Her eyes widened at the sight before her. "Eli." "What in heaven's name?" "Clara, I need your help," Eli said quietly. "This little girl is sick with fever. We got medicine from the fort, but she needs proper care." Clara hesitated, her gaze falling on Nita's dark hair and thin face. Something flickered in her expression, uncertainty, perhaps remembering the whispered prejudices that ran through their small community. But then Nita stirred weakly, and Clara's maternal instincts seemed to override everything else. She reached out to touch the child's forehead. "Lord have mercy. She's burning up," Clara murmured. Her face softened with concern as she stepped back, opening the door wider. "Bring her in, quickly. There's a spare bed in the back room." Relief flooded through Eli as he carried Nita inside. The cabin was warm and smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Clara hurried ahead of him, lighting an extra lamp and turning down the covers of the narrow bed in her spare room. "Lay her here," she directed, already rolling up her sleeves. "Where's the medicine?" "Her brother has it. He's outside with the horses." "Well, bring him in too." Poor child must be worried sick. Eli went to fetch Tahani, who had already dismounted and was hovering anxiously by the door. The boy entered cautiously, clutching the precious vial of quinine from the fort doctor. Clara took it from him with gentle hands, examining the label in the lamplight. "This will help," she said with quiet confidence. "But she'll need careful tending through the night. I'll mix it with water. It'll be easier for her to take that way," while Clara prepared the medicine. Eli and Tahani waited in her small kitchen. The boy perched on the edge of a wooden chair, his shoulders tense, dark eyes fixed on the doorway to the spare room. Eli wished he had words of comfort to offer, but uncertainty gnawed at his own heart. "Your sister's in good hands," he finally said, keeping his voice low. "Mrs. Benson has helped many folks through fever before." Tahani nodded but didn't speak. The clock on Clara's wall ticked steadily, marking the long minutes as they passed. From the spare room came the soft sounds of Clara moving about, the splash of water in a basin, the creak of floorboards, and eventually, the gentle humming of hymns. Eli recognized the tune, Amazing Grace, and something in his chest tightened. He remembered Clara singing that same hymn at his wife's funeral, her voice clear and strong even through her tears. Now she sang it softly, almost under her breath, as she tended to a stranger's child. The night deepened. Tahani dozed fitfully in his chair while Eli stoked the kitchen fire, keeping the coffee hot. Every so often, Clara would emerge to fetch fresh water or clean cloths, her face tired but determined. She worked steadily, wiping Nita's brow with cool cloths, coaxing small sips of the quinine mixture between the girl's cracked lips. and monitoring her breathing. Hours passed this way, marked only by the steady tick of the clock and Clara's quiet movements. The first hint of dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky when Clara finally came to the kitchen. Wiping her hands on her apron, both Eli and Tohani straightened, alert for news. "The fever's broken," she announced with a tired smile. "She's sleeping naturally now, not the restless sleep of sickness." Tohani's face crumpled with relief. He spoke something soft in Navajo, pressing his hands together as if in prayer. Clara touched his shoulder gently. "Would you like to see her?" "Quietly now, let her rest." The boy nodded eagerly, following Clara to the spare room. Eli trailed behind them, pausing in the doorway. Nita lay peaceful in the narrow bed, her breathing even and deep. The frightening flush of fever had faded from her cheeks, replaced by the healthy color of natural sleep. Tohani sank into the chair beside her bed. Taking her small hand in his, Clara shooed them back to the kitchen, where morning light now streamed through the windows. She pulled a loaf of fresh bread from her cupboard, along with butter and preserves. "Sit," she instructed, already cutting thick slices. "You all need something in your stomachs after such a night." As they ate, Clara studied Eli over the rim of her coffee cup. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "my grandmother used to say, God sometimes sends strangers to our door for a reason." She glanced toward the spare room, where Nita slept. "Perhaps he had a purpose in bringing these children to us." Eli chewed slowly, considering her words. He was not a man given to seeing divine intervention in everyday events, but something about this situation felt different. The timing of finding Tohani with his horse, the fort doctor's unexpected help, Clara's willingness to take them in, it all seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known needed solving. Relief settled over him like a warm blanket. For now, at least, the immediate crisis had passed. Nita was recovering. Tohani's desperate quest for help had succeeded, and they had found allies where they least expected them. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring could wait. For this moment, in Clara's sun-filled kitchen, with the smell of fresh bread in the air, hope had indeed returned. Days settled into a gentle rhythm at Clara's cabin, each sunrise bringing new signs of healing. The morning after their arrival, Clara had insisted the children stay with her while they recovered. "My spare room's been empty too long," she'd said softly, her eyes distant with memories. Eli found himself spending more time at Clara's place than his own ranch house. Each morning, he and Tohani would head out to mend the trampled fence section, their boots crunching through frost-covered grass. The boy proved himself handy with tools, learning quickly how to splice wire and set posts straight. "My father taught me some," Tohani explained on their second day out, handling the fence pliers with growing confidence. Before he went to survey the railroad grade, his voice grew quiet at the mention of his father. But his hands kept working steady and sure. Eli nodded, respecting the boy's grief while appreciating his determination. "You're doing fine work here," he said simply, watching Tohani's shoulders straighten at the praise. They fell into an easy partnership, hauling water from the well to fill Clara's rain barrel and Eli's stock tank. Tohani proved especially good with the horses, spending extra time with Dustfire. The gelding, usually wary of strangers, began nickering softly whenever the boy approached. "He remembers you saved his sister," Eli remarked one afternoon, watching Tohani brush Dustfire's coat until it gleamed. Horses know good hearts when they meet them. Inside Clara's cabin, other kinds of healing took place. Nita, finally strong enough to sit up in bed, sipped Clara's chicken broth while the former schoolteacher read aloud from well-worn books. Clara's voice grew animated as she shared stories, her earlier hesitation melting away like spring snow. "Miss Clara makes the best biscuits," Nita declared one evening at supper, color finally returning to her cheeks. She reached for a second helping, her movements still careful but growing stronger each day. Clara's eyes sparkled at the praise, though Eli caught a flash of old pain beneath her smile. He knew she was remembering another little girl who had loved those same biscuits before fever had taken her years ago. But now that shadow of grief seemed lighter somehow, softened by Nita's presence. They gathered each evening around Clara's sturdy oak table, sharing simple meals that grew more cheerful as days passed. Tahani would tell them about life on the reservation, describing ceremonies and customs with quiet pride. Clara listened intently, sometimes asking thoughtful questions that showed her genuine interest in understanding their ways. "My mother would sing special songs when gathering herbs," Tahani explained one night, helping Clara clear the dishes. Each plant had its own melody. He hummed a few notes, then stopped, suddenly shy. "That's beautiful," Clara said warmly. "Perhaps you could teach me sometime. I'd like to learn more about your mother's medicines." Eli watched the exchange from his place by the stove, noting how naturally Clara included both children in conversation and chores. She never pushed too hard or demanded too much, but slowly drew them out like shy, wild creatures learning to trust. One evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, bringing the scent of rain. Eli helped Clara secure the shutters while Tahani led Dustfire to the barn. Thunder rolled across the hills as they hurried inside, the first heavy drops starting to fall. The lamp cast warm circles of light as they settled in the front room. Nita, wrapped in a quilt Clara had made, dozed in the rocking chair while Tahani whittled a small piece of wood nearby. Clara sat at her mending, but her hands were still in her lap, her eyes distant. "I used to pray every night," she said softly, almost to herself. "After losing Sarah, I begged God for another chance at motherhood. But as years passed, I stopped asking, stopped hoping." She looked at the sleeping girl, then at Tahani bent over his carving. "Never thought he'd answer my prayers like this." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating tears in Clara's eyes. But she was smiling too. A real smile that reached deep inside and glowed like embers. Eli felt something shift in his own heart, watching her. He remembered the grief-stricken widow who'd moved to the neighboring property 3 years ago. How she'd kept to herself except for teaching at the town school. Now he saw a different Clara emerging, one who hummed while cooking, who laughed at Nita's small jokes, who carried hope in her steps again. The storm raged outside, rain drumming on the roof and wind rattling the shutters. But inside Clara's cabin, lamplight pooled golden on the floor. Tahani looked up from his whittling to ask Clara about her teaching days. She set aside her mending to tell them about her first classroom, gesturing as she described the adventures of wrangling 20 young students. Nita stirred in her chair, blinking sleepily. "Tell us more, Miss Clara," she murmured, snuggling deeper into her quilt. Eli leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the scene wash over him. Here in this room, something remarkable was taking shape. Not a family bound by blood, but one forming through shared meals and stories, through trust slowly earned and freely given. He thought of his empty ranch house, of meals eaten alone since his wife's passing. Then he looked at Clara's bright eyes, at Tahani's rare smile, at Nita's peaceful face, and felt his world expanding to hold this new possibility. Thunder cracked overhead, but none of them startled. They were too absorbed in Clara's tale of the time her students put a garden snake in her desk drawer. Tahani's quiet laughter mingled with Nita's giggles and Clara's theatrical retelling. Even Eli found himself chuckling, caught up in the simple joy of belonging. Later, as the storm began to ease, Eli watched Clara tuck Nita into bed. The girl wrapped thin arms around Clara's neck, whispering good night. Miss Clara, with such trust, it brought a lump to his throat. In the hallway, Tahani paused before heading to his room, nodding solemnly to them both, his way of showing appreciation. "They're good children," Clara said softly as she walked Eli to the door. Despite everything they've lost, there's such strength in them. Eli nodded, thinking of Tohani's careful work with the fences, of Nita's determined efforts to grow stronger. Reckon they're teaching us something too, he replied. About starting over. About finding family in unexpected places. Clara's eyes met his understanding, passing between them like a current. The lamp she held cast warm light on her face, softening the worry lines that had marked it for so long. For a moment, Eli wanted to say more, to put words to the feeling growing in his chest. But the time wasn't quite right. "Good night, Clara," he said instead, stepping out into the rain-washed night. Behind him, her lamp glowed like a beacon, guiding him home through the darkness. But somehow, he realized, home had become more than just his own four walls. It had grown to include Clara's oak table, Tohani's quiet presence, Nita's sweet smile, this unlikely family forming day by day. Meal by meal, story by story. The rain had settled into a gentle patter, promising new growth for tomorrow. Eli walked toward his house, boots squelching in the mud, his heart fuller than it had been in years. Above him, stars began peeking through breaks in the clouds, their light touching everything with silver, including the fresh-mended fence where he and Tohani would work again tomorrow. Building something strong enough to last. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clara's front yard as Eli saddled his horse for the ride into town. Dustifier stomped restlessly, eager to stretch his legs after days of easy work around the homestead. The air held the crisp bite of early autumn, promising a clear day ahead. "Mind if I leave Tohani here to help with the morning chores?" Eli asked Clara, who stood on her porch wiping her hands on her apron. Inside, he could hear Nita's quiet laugh as she and Tohani cleared breakfast dishes. Of course, Clara smiled, though concern flickered in her eyes. But Eli? "Be careful in town. Word travels fast out here." Eli nodded, knowing she meant more than she said. He adjusted his hat against the rising sun and swung into the saddle. "Just need supplies. Won't be gone long." The ride into town took nearly 2 hours, giving Eli plenty of time to think. The past week had brought changes he'd never expected to orphan children at his neighbor's table, Clara's whole demeanor brightening, and his own heart opening in ways that both warmed and worried him. The main street was already bustling when he tied Dustfire outside Jensen's general store. A group of ranchers lounged near the hitching post, their conversation dying as Eli approached. He tipped his hat but received only stiff nods in return. Inside the store, the usual morning quiet was replaced by pointed whispers and sidelong glances. Mrs. Jensen, normally chatty while weighing out sugar or coffee, barely met his eyes as she filled his order. Behind him, he heard Bradley Thompson, who ran cattle on the necks spread over, mutter something about Indian sympathizers bringing trouble. Eli kept his shoulders straight and his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened. He'd known these men for years, shared fence work and roundups with them. Now they looked at him like he'd betrayed some unspoken code. As he gathered his supplies, Sheriff Albright appeared at his elbow. The lawman's weathered face was drawn with concern. "Got a minute, Eli?" Albright gestured toward the back of the store. They stepped between towers of feed sacks, away from prying ears. The sheriff's voice dropped low. "Folks are restless. Eli, words got around about those children you took in. Clara's looking after them," Eli corrected. "They were sick, needed help. Don't matter much how it happened. People are scared. Drought's got everyone on edge. And now with rumors about the railroad coming through," Albright shook his head. "Just don't give them reason, understand? Keep those kids close to home." The warning settled heavy in Eli's gut. He'd seen what fear and prejudice could do to otherwise decent men. Still, he wouldn't be pushed into abandoning 2 innocent children. "They're no threat to anyone," he said firmly. Albright sighed. "Hope you're right. Watch yourself, Eli. Leaving the store felt like walking through molasses, the weight of unfriendly eyes following his every move. He secured his supplies and headed toward the post office, determined to finish his errands quickly. The post office occupied one corner of the telegraph office, its wooden cubicles stuffed with weeks of delayed mail. As Eli rifled through his slot, his fingers caught on a thick envelope he nearly missed. It was addressed to Miss Nita Whitefeather in shaky handwriting. Care of the Indian agent at Fort Crittenden. Eli studied the return address: Thomas Maxwell, Railroad Survey Office, Denver. The paper was good quality, but the envelope showed signs of having been forwarded multiple times before reaching town. Something about it made him slip it into his vest pocket rather than adding it to his saddlebags. The ride home seemed longer, his mind churning with questions. The sun had begun its westward slide when he finally dismounted in Clara's yard. Tohani appeared from the barn where he'd been feeding the chickens and helped unload supplies. "Any trouble in town?" Clara asked quietly when Eli stepped into her kitchen. She stood at the stove, stirring a pot of rabbit stew, while Nita sat at the table carefully forming letters in a notebook Clara had given her. "Nothing worth mentioning," Eli answered, though his hand strayed to the letter in his pocket. He wasn't sure why he hesitated to mention it. Perhaps because its existence might change everything, for better or worse. They settled around Clara's table as evening drew in, lamplight casting warm shadows on the walls. The stew was rich with vegetables from her garden, and fresh biscuits steamed on a plate between them. Tohani and Nita seemed more at ease than ever, the boy even cracking a shy joke that made Clara laugh. Eli found himself watching them all. Clara's gentle encouragement as she helped Nita hold her spoon steady. Tohani's protective glances at his sister. The way they'd begun to feel like ... something he wasn't ready to name yet. Outside, coyotes started their evening chorus, their wild songs echoing off the canyon walls. Inside, the lamp flickered over their shared meal, and the letter pressed against Eli's chest like a secret waiting to be told. He knew he should share what he'd found. If the letter truly contained land deeds in Nita's name, it could mean legal protection for the children. But it could also mean danger. There were plenty of folks who'd go to great lengths to control railroad right-of-ways, especially if they thought they could steal them from a mixed heritage child. The warmth of the kitchen suddenly felt fragile, like a soap bubble that might burst at the slightest touch. Eli watched Nita carefully spooning up her stew, her face peaceful in the lamplight, and decided the letter could wait until morning. Tonight, he wanted to preserve this moment of simple belonging. Even knowing tomorrow might change everything. Clara caught his eye across the table, her expression questioning. He gave a slight shake of his head. "Not now." She nodded, understanding without words, and passed the biscuits around again. The coyotes sang on, their wild voices a reminder of how quickly peace could turn to chaos in this untamed land. But for now, in this kitchen, with these people who'd somehow become important to him, Eli let himself believe that whatever the letter held, they'd face it together. The morning sunlight streamed through Clara's kitchen windows, warming the worn wooden table where breakfast dishes steamed. Eli sat with the letter burning a hole in his pocket, watching as Clara poured coffee into tin cups. Nita, still pale but improving, pushed her spoon through a bowl of cornmeal mush. Tohani sat straight-backed beside her, alert as always. Eli cleared his throat. "Got something important to share." He pulled out the wrinkled envelope, its edges softened from writing in his vest. "This came yesterday. It's addressed to you, Nita." The girl's eyes widened. Clara paused mid-pour, coffee pot hovering. "It's from your PA's railroad partner," Eli continued, unfolding the paper carefully. "Seems your father did more than survey land. He filed deeds in your name before he passed." Tohani leaned forward, his usual guardedness giving way to curiosity. What kind of deeds? Legal ones. For land along the proposed railroad route, Eli spread the papers on the table, pointing to the official stamps and signatures. Your PA made sure you'd have something solid to stand on. Clara set down the coffee pot and settled into her chair. Brow furrowed. May I see? Eli passed her the documents. She studied them, lips moving silently as she read. These look properly filed. But Eli, ... She glanced at the children, then back to him. If word gets out about this claim, ... I know Eli's jaw tightened. Some folks already ain't too pleased about me helping them. Nita's small voice broke through their worried exchange. Does this mean ... She twisted her fingers in her lap. Does it mean we can belong somewhere? For true? The hope in her voice made Eli's chest ache. Law's on your side, little one. These papers say that land's yours fair and square. Tohani sat up straighter, pride gleaming in his dark eyes. Father always said he was working to give us a future. Now we know what he meant. Clara reached across the table to squeeze Nita's hand. Your pa was looking out for you both, even at the end. Eli pushed back his chair. Need to ride to the courthouse, verify everything's proper. He drained his coffee cup. Best to know exactly where we stand. The courthouse stood tall in the town square, its red brick walls catching the midday sun. Inside, the air hung heavy with dust and old paper. The county clerk, Mr. Peterson, peered at Eli over wire-rimmed spectacles as he examined the documents. These are genuine enough, Peterson said finally, running a finger down the neat columns of text. Filed proper, recorded in the books. He glanced up, expression grave. But I'll tell you straight, Harkness, that paper makes her more enemy than neighbor to some round here. How do you figure? Eli kept his voice level, though his hands wanted to curl into fists. Railroads coming through. Land values rising. Folks been eyeing those parcels. Peterson carefully refolded the papers. Some won't take kindly to learning a Huffindian girl holds deed to prime territory. Law's still law, Eli said firmly. Indeed it is. Peterson handed back the documents. Just mind how you proceed. Papers can't stop a bullet. The ride home stretched longer than usual, Eli's thoughts churning like storm clouds. The deed felt heavy in his vest pocket. Legal right was one thing, but Peterson's warning echoed with ugly truth. Some men would rather see justice burned than honor an Indian child's claim. Evening settled soft around Clara's cabin. Lamplight spilled warm through the windows as she led them in prayer before supper. Lord, guide our steps in darkness, she murmured, head bowed. Show us the path of wisdom and righteousness. Eli added his own silent prayer. Lord, help me protect these children. Show me how. The meal passed quietly. Afterward, Nita and Tohani curled up near the hearth like tired pups, their faces peaceful in sleep. Clara worked at her mending while Eli sat at the table. Deed papers spread before him in the lamp's golden circle. What are you thinking? Clara asked softly, not looking up from her needle. Thinking how quick peace can shatter. He touched the paper's official seals. Thinking how to keep these young ones safe when word gets out. We'll find a way. Clara's voice held steady faith. God didn't bring them to us just to abandon them now. Eli nodded, though worry still gnawed. The papers before him promised hope and belonging, but they also marked these children as targets. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the dark. Inside, the lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall while two children slept, unaware their future hung balanced between justice and danger. The deed lay exposed in the lamplight, its black ink stark against white paper. Eli traced the official signatures with a weathered finger, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper into his bones. These weren't just papers anymore. They were a promise of home and a challenge to everything this territory thought it knew about. Belonging, Clara's needle flashed steady in the lamplight as she worked. The quiet scratch of thread through fabric mingled with the children's soft breathing near the hearth. For now, peace held. But Eli knew, they all knew, that peace was as fragile as the paper that guaranteed. Nita's claim, he gathered the documents carefully, folding them with reverence before tucking them away. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, in this warm circle of lamplight, with Clara's quiet presence and the children's trusting sleep, Eli could only watch and wait, praying their fragile family would weather whatever storm was brewing. 2 weeks passed like gentle water over stones. The desert spring brought touches of green to the mesquite, and morning glories climbed Clara's porch rails in delicate purple sprays. Life settled into rhythms as natural as breathing. Nita's recovery showed in small ways each day. Her thin face filled out, and color returned to her cheeks like sunrise on adobe walls. Most mornings found her in Clara's garden, carefully pulling weeds from between the tender vegetable shoots. She would hum old hymns Clara had taught her voice as sweet as meadowlark song. "See how straight these rows are getting?" Clara would praise, showing Nita how to bank soil around young corn stalks. The girl's smile could light up the darkest day. Out in the home pasture, Eli discovered an unexpected joy in teaching Tohani the ways of cattle work. The boy took to it like he was born to it, though the first few tries with a lariat nearly ended in comical disaster. "Keep your loop wider," Eli called one morning, fighting back laughter as Tohani spun himself into the rope while trying to catch a practice post. "And mind your footing." Tohani untangled himself, grinning despite his embarrassment. "The rope has a mind of its own, Mr. Harkness." "That it does, son. That it does." The word "son" slipped out natural as breathing, and neither seemed to mind. When Sunday came, Eli hitched the wagon while Clara helped the children into their best clothes. Nita in a faded blue dress Clara had taken in, Tohani in a clean work shirt with his hair neatly combed. The morning air held the promise of heat, but for now it was cool enough for Clara to wear her good shawl. "We don't have to go," Eli said quietly as he helped Clara up to the wagon seat. They both knew what reception might await at the church. Clara's chin lifted. "The Lord's house should welcome all his children," she said firmly. "Besides, they need to see that these young ones belong somewhere." The wagon wheels left twin tracks in the dusty road as they made their way to town. Nita and Tohani sat in the back, unnaturally quiet. When they pulled up to the white-painted church, other wagons were already there, and folks stood in small clusters. Visiting before the service, the conversations died as Eli helped his makeshift family down from the wagon. Whispers rose like wind through dry grass. Some turned their backs pointedly. Others stared openly, their faces hard as sun-baked clay. Clara kept her head high, one hand on Nita's shoulder as they climbed the wooden steps. Tohani walked close to Eli's side, his body tense as a drawn BOWSTRNG. Inside, the morning sun streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts. They found a pew near the back, but there was no hiding from the sideways glances and muttered comments. Pastor Green stood at his pulpit, watching the congregation settle. His eyes found their little group, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate. Then he smiled, warm and genuine as summer rain. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying to the rafters, "today's scripture speaks to us of love. Our Lord Jesus said, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" Clara's eyes filled with grateful tears. Nita leaned against her side while Tohani sat straighter, as if the pastor's words were a shield against the cold stares around them. The service continued with familiar hymns and prayers. Some voices nearby sang quieter than usual, while others refused to sing at all. Yet Clara's clear soprano rose strong and true, teaching Nita the words line by line. Even Tohani hummed along by the final verse. When the last amen faded, people began filing out into the morning sun. Eli thought they might slip away quietly, but Trace McCall, a rancher from up near the creek, stepped into their path. A word, Harkness. His voice carried just enough for nearby folks to pause, eager for spectacle. Eli moved slightly in front of his family. "Make it quick, McCall." "We've got dinner waiting." McCall's weather-beaten face twisted. "Seems to me you're making some peculiar choices lately. Taking in strays, bringing them here among decent folk." He glanced meaningfully at Tohani and Nita. "You choosing them over us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Clara drew the children closer while other churchgoers gathered, watching. Eli kept his voice level, though his hands wanted to curl into fists. "I reckon I'm choosing what's right, McCall. Same as any God-fearing man should." "That's so." McCall's tone dripped contempt. "Time was you knew the difference between your own kind, and that's enough." Pastor Green's quiet voice cut through the tension. He'd come down from the church steps, Bible still in hand. "We've just heard the Lord's words about loving our neighbors. Let's not sow discord on his day of rest." McCall subsided, though his glare promised this wasn't finished. Other ranchers drifted away, some nodding to Eli, others turning their backs. The ride home was quieter than the journey in. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning cool. Clara broke the silence first, turning to smile at the children in the wagon bed. "You both did so well today," she said warmly. "The Lord sees past what men see on the outside. He looks at our hearts." Nita touched the small cross Clara had given her. The singing was beautiful. "Could you teach me more hymns?" "Of course, dear one. We'll learn them all." Tohani stayed quiet, but his shoulders had loosened their defensive set. He watched the passing landscape with thoughtful eyes. Eli handled the reins, considering the morning's events. The confrontation with McCall worried him not for himself, but for what it might mean for the children's safety. Yet seeing them welcomed by Pastor Green, hearing them join in the hymns, watching them find a place in the church despite the cold shoulders, it strengthened his resolve. They arrived home as the dinner hour approached. The familiar sight of Clara's cabin, with its morning glory vines and tidy yard, felt like a haven. As they climbed down from the wagon, Clara paused to straighten Nita's hair ribbon. "Remember," she said softly, "faith is stronger than fear, and love is stronger than hate." Eli unhitched the horses, watching as Clara led the children inside to help with Sunday dinner. The morning's tensions still hung in the air like distant thunder, but for now, they were home. For now, they were family. The smell of baking bread drifted from Clara's kitchen. Soon they would gather around her table, saying grace and sharing a meal as they had come to do each day. It wasn't the life Eli had imagined for himself. But watching through the window as Clara showed Nita how to set places while Tohani pumped fresh water, he knew it was the life he would fight to protect. The autumn wind whistled across the San Pedro Valley, stirring dust devils that danced between the fence posts of Eli's ranch. Golden light spilled through Clara's cabin windows as evening approached, carrying the sound of Nita's careful voice sounding out words from her primer. The Lord is my shepherd. Nita reads slowly, her finger tracing each word while Clara sat beside her at the kitchen table. "That's right," Clara encouraged, her eyes bright with pride. "You're learning so quick." She smoothed Nita's dark hair, remembering how frail the child had been just weeks ago. Now color bloomed in her cheeks, matching the late roses that still clung to life in Clara's garden. Through the window, Eli and Tohani worked the corral, their figures backlit by the setting sun. The boy had taken to ranch work like he was born to it, learning to swing a rope with natural grace. His laughter carried on the wind as Dustfire dodged his latest attempt at roping. "Keep your loop wider," Eli called out, demonstrating with his own lariat. "That's the way." The peaceful scene shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. 3 riders appeared through the settling dust, their horses lathered from hard riding. Eli recognized Wade Turner's distinctive black Stetson, along with the Dawson brothers' matching dun horses. "Evening, Harkness," Turner called out, his voice carrying an edge sharp as a knife. "Reckon we need to have us a talk." Eli's hand dropped casually to his hip, where his Colt rode in its worn leather holster. "Say your piece then." The men dismounted, boots striking earth with deliberate heaviness. Inside the cabin, Clara drew Nita close, while Tohani slipped through the corral gate to stand near Eli. His young face set with determination. "Way we see it," Turner said, hooking his thumbs in his belt. "You're making a mistake harboring these ... strays." He spat the last word like something bitter. "Folks are talking. Time to send them back where they belong?" "They belong right here," Eli said quietly, but his voice carried steel. "The girls got legal claim to land hereabouts. Papers filed proper with the county clerk." This news hit the men like a physical blow. The younger Dawson brother cursed under his breath, while Turner's face darkened like a thunderhead. "That's so." Turner stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. "Funny how no one heard about this deed before. Even funnier how you're suddenly playing nursemaid to Indian kids with suspicious claims." "Ain't nothing suspicious about it," Eli said. "Their father was a railroad man. Filed it all legal-like before he passed. You can check the courthouse yourself if you don't believe me. Maybe we." Will Turner's hand twitched near his gun belt. "But here's how it's going to be, Harkness. You're choosing sides here. These children or your neighbors. Can't have both. Ain't about choosing sides," Eli said. "It's about doing what's right." Turner spat in the dust between them. "Right, what's right about taking their part over your own kind? We've all suffered Indian raids. Lost stock. Lost kin, some of us. Now you're harboring them like they're your own flesh and blood. These children ain't raiders." Clara's voice rang out from the cabin porch where she now stood, rifle in hand. "They're innocent souls who need help. The good book says, save your preaching." Widow Benson, the elder Dawson, interrupted. "This ain't church business. It's everybody's business when justice gets twisted." Clara replied firmly. Turner's face hardened. "You'll regret this, Harkness. Both of you. Mark my words." He turned to his horse, mounting with fluid anger. "You're siding against your own people. That ain't something folks forget." The 3 men rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving behind a silence heavy as lead. Eli's shoulders remained tense until the riders disappeared over the rise. Only then did he notice Tohani's white-knuckled grip on the corral post. "You didn't have to do that," the boy said quietly. "Stand up for us like that." Eli placed a gentle hand on Tohani's shoulder. "Yes, I did." That night, Eli patrolled the fence line by moonlight, Hayes Winchester across his lap as Dustfire picked his way along familiar paths. The desert wind carried night sounds, coyotes yipping in the distance, an owl's lonely call, the rustle of dry grass. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threat. Near midnight, he returned to find Clara waiting on his porch, a shawl wrapped tight against the chill. She held out a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cool air. "Can't sleep either?" she asked as he settled beside her on the rough-hewn bench. "Keeping watch," Eli said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Turner ain't the type to let things lie." Clara nodded, her face thoughtful in the lamplight spilling through the window. "The children are afraid," she said softly. "I heard them whispering after prayers. Tohani promised Nita he wouldn't let anyone take her away, but ... double quotes, she sighed. They've lost so much already, won't lose their home, Eli said firmly. "Not while I draw breath. The Lord teaches mercy over vengeance," Clara reminded him, though her eyes showed understanding of his protective instinct. "Mercy's what I'm showing," Eli replied. "Could have shot Turner for threatening children under my roof. Would have been within my rights." A sound from inside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Nita and Tohani huddled together near the fireplace, speaking in low voices. The sight squeezed Eli's heart with unexpected tenderness. "Remember when they first came?" Clara asked softly. How scared they were. How Nita could barely lift her head from fever. Eli nodded, watching the children through the glass. "Seems like years ago, not weeks. They're ours now," Clara said simply. "Maybe not by blood, but by something just as strong. The Lord brings families together in mysterious ways," as if sensing their gaze. Tohani looked up and met Eli's eyes through the window. The boy's face showed worry, but also trust, complete and unshakable trust that Eli would protect them. It hit him then how fully these children had worked their way into his heart. This wasn't about duty anymore, or even justice. This was about love, pure and simple as desert rain. Dawn found Eli still on the porch, rifle ready, but unused through the night. The rising sun painted the mountains pink and gold, promising another day of autumn glory. His resolve had hardened like iron in a forge. These children were family now, and family stood together. Let Turner and his kind come. They'd find out just how far a man would go to protect his own. Clara emerged with fresh coffee and biscuits, the children following with sleepy eyes but brave smiles. They ate breakfast together on the porch, watching the sun climb higher. Their small family united against whatever storms might come. The autumn sun beat down on the dusty main street as Eli rode into town. The leather satchel containing Nita's precious deed papers pressed against his side. Word of his stand against Turner and the Dawsons had spread like wildfire through the community. He could feel the weight of suspicious stares from the boardwalk as he tied Dustfire outside the courthouse, inside. The county clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. Mr. Jenkins, the clerk, peered at Eli over wire-rimmed spectacles. His wrinkled face carefully neutral. "Need these papers kept safe," Eli said, laying the deed on the scratched wooden counter. "Official record and storage." Jenkins examined the documents with practiced eyes. Railroad deed for the girl. "Heard talk about this." He paused, dipping his pen in ink. "Mighty peculiar situation." "Mr. Harkness, nothing peculiar about following the law," Eli replied evenly. The clerk nodded slowly, making his official notations. "True enough. Though law and local feeling don't always agree." He carefully filed the papers in a heavy leather binder. "These'll be secure here. Got a fireproof safe and everything." Leaving the courthouse, Eli noticed a cluster of ranchers outside the saloon fall silent as he passed. Their hostile glares followed him down the street. Outside the general store, women gathered their skirts and hurried inside, whispering behind raised hands. "Harkness." Eli turned to see Sheriff Albright striding toward him, badge glinting in the sun. The lawman's weathered face was creased with concern. "Walk with me," Albright said quietly. They moved away from the busy street, boots crunching on gravel. When they were out of earshot, Albright spoke in low tones. "Got word of trouble brewing. Some folks talking about taking matters into their own hands." The sheriff's eyes were grave. "Turner's been gathering support, claiming you're setting dangerous precedent by following the law." Eli asked, "Law's one thing. Vigilante justice is another." Albright adjusted his gun belt. "I can't stop every hot-headed fool with a rifle and a grudge. Best be on your guard." Eli nodded, grateful for the warning. "Much obliged, Sheriff." The telegraph office was his next stop. Inside, the operator's fingers clicked out a steady rhythm on the brass key. Eli wrote his message carefully. To James Morton, Railroad Company. Tuck Sohn regarding Nita Wilson deed claim. Need support, local resistance growing. Children safe but situation urgent. Reply, soonest. The operator counted out the words, collecting payment. His eyes lingered on the message, and Eli knew this too would feed the town gossip. Let them talk. The truth would stand. Dust devils swirled down the street as Eli mounted Dust's fire for the ride home. The sun was already dropping toward the western hills, painting the clouds in shades of gold and purple. His mind churned with worry, knowing that Albright's warning meant real danger approached. The sight that greeted him at home eased some of his tension. Light spilled from Clara's cabin windows, and the smell of fresh bread wafted across the yard. Inside, Clara stood at the stove while Nita carefully set the table. Tahani carried in an armload of firewood, nodding seriously at Eli. Just in time, Clara said warmly. Stew's ready. They joined hands around the table. Heads bowed as Clara offered thanks for the food and asked for protection. The children's quiet amen brought a lump to Eli's throat. Over supper, conversation stayed light, but Eli could sense the underlying tension. Finally, as they finished the last bites of Clara's apple pie, he knew it was time to speak truth. Nita, he said gently, got your father's deed papers filed proper at the courthouse today. That land is yours, by right and by law. The girl's face lit up with a tremulous smile, hope shining in her dark eyes. But beside her, Tahani's expression flickered with fear. The boy understood as Eli did. That paper laws might not stop determined men with guns and hatred in their hearts. We'll protect it, Tahani said fiercely, like father would have wanted. Clara reached across the table to squeeze the boy's hand. The Lord will provide a way, she said softly. We must have faith. Eli met her eyes across the lamplight, seeing his own determination mirrored there. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The deed was secure, but the real test still lay ahead. The moon had barely risen when the first shouts broke the evening quiet. Lantern light flickered through the darkness as a crowd gathered in the street outside Eli's home. The glow cast twisted shadows across angry faces, at least 20 men. Some on horseback, others standing with rifles ready. Bring out them Indian children. Someone called, They don't belong here. Inside, Clara held Nita close to her chest, the girl trembling against her dress. Tahani crept to the window, his eyes wide with fear as he watched the mob grow larger. Eli checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. Stay inside, he told them quietly. I'll handle this. The wooden porch steps creaked under his boots as he stepped out, rifle held steady but pointed down. The crowd shifted restlessly, lanterns swaying like fireflies in the dark. Evening, neighbors, Eli said, his voice carrying across the yard. Seems late for a social call. This ain't social, Harkness. Frank Turner called out. We're taking them children to the Indian agent where they belong. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Behind Eli, Tahani had slipped out to the stable. The boy clung to Dustfire's reins, ready to flee if needed. The horse stomped nervously, sensing the tension. Hoofbeats approached from town. And Sheriff Albright rode up, his badge catching the lantern light. Now folks, he called out, let's keep this peaceful. No need for trouble tonight, peaceful. Someone shouted. Harkness is harboring Indians against the town's wishes. They have legal right to be here, Eli said firmly, standing his ground. And they're staying. A stone whistled through the air, crashing through the front window. Glass tinkled onto the floor inside as Clara gasped, shielding Nita from the shards. That's enough. Sheriff Albright's voice cracked like a whip. Everyone clear out until morning. That's an order. The mob grumbled and shifted, but slowly began to disperse. "This ain't over, Harkness," Turner called back. "We'll be back when the sun's up." Inside, Clara hummed softly to Nita while sweeping up broken glass. Tohani huddled near the fireplace, still shaking. Eli stood at the window, watching until the last lantern disappeared into the darkness. The night settled into uneasy quiet, broken only by the wind rattling loose shutters and the soft sound of Clara's prayers. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale watercolors as Nita suddenly slumped forward at the breakfast table. Her face had gone ashen, her small body trembling with renewed fever. "The strain's been too much," Clara whispered, gathering the girl into her arms. She carried Nita to the bedroom while Eli followed, his weathered face etched with concern. Clara worked quickly, laying cool cloths on Nita's forehead and mixing willow bark tea. The girl's breathing came shallow and fast, her skin burning hot to the touch. Eli sat heavily in the chair beside the bed, his calloused hands clasped in silent prayer. Outside, Tohani's boots scraped back and forth across the porch boards. When Eli stepped out to check on him, the boy's eyes were dark with worry. "Maybe we should go," Tohani said softly, his voice catching. "Don't want to bring more trouble to you and Miss Clara." Eli placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "Running won't solve this. That would just hand victory to their prejudice. You and your sister have every right to be here." By afternoon, Eli had made his decision. He saddled Dustfire and rode into town, the deed papers secure in his vest pocket. The saloon fell quiet as he pushed through the swinging doors, boots echoing on the wooden floor. Several of the ranchers from last night's mob sat nursing drinks. They watched with hard eyes as Eli approached the bar and spread out the legal documents. "Take a good look," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "This here's a legal deed, filed proper and witnessed." Nita's father made sure his daughter would have a rightful claim to her land. Frank Miller squinted at the papers, his face darkening. "Law don't change what's right," he muttered. Eli met his gaze steadily. "No," he agreed, "but mercy does." The words hung in the dusty air. Some men shifted uncomfortably, gazes dropping to their drinks. Others stormed out, spurs jingling angry. But Eli noticed a few thoughtful expressions among those who remained. When he returned home, Clara met him at the door with relief in her eyes. "Nita's fever's broken," she said. "She's sleeping peaceful now." "Thank the Lord," Eli sighed, removing his hat. "I've never felt so tested in all my days." Clara touched his arm gently. "Your courage today gave me hope," she said. "Standing up for what's right ain't always easy, but it's always necessary." The telegram arrived on a bright autumn morning. Eli stood at the telegraph office, reading the yellow paper with trembling hands. The railroad partner's message was clear and firm, he acknowledged. Nita's inheritance and pledge to honor her father's deed. More than that, he promised legal support if needed. Sheriff Albright received his own telegram that afternoon. Though his jaw was tight, he gathered the most vocal ranchers to deliver the news. "Matters settled by law," he announced, touching his badge meaningfully. "Girl's claim is solid. Any man thinking different better keep his thoughts to himself." Wade Turner and his friends muttered darkly, but the fight seemed to drain from them. Open hostility faded like morning mist, replaced by grudging acceptance. Some neighbors even nodded when passing Clara's gate, where Nita now helped tend bright marigolds and late tomatoes. Life settled into comfortable rhythms. Eli and Tohani worked the fences together, the boy's small hands growing steadier with the tools. Clara's garden yielded its autumn harvest, filling her root cellar with potatoes and squash. In the evenings, lamplit hymns drifted from her cabin windows, four voices blending in harmony. When Sunday came, Pastor Green surprised them all. "Brother Harkness," he called out during service, "would you share with us why you chose mercy over judgment?" Eli's throat went dry as he stood. The wooden floorboards creaked under his boots as he faced the congregation. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, illuminating familiar faces. Some friendly, some still uncertain. Double quotes, he cleared his throat, hands clasped before him. I reckon it's simple enough. When a child needs a home, God's people don't turn away. That's all I knew to do. The silence held for a moment. Then someone began to clap. The applause spread, filling the small church with unexpected warmth. Clara's fingers found his as he sat back down, squeezing gently. Nita and Tohani beamed from their place in the pew, pride shining in their eyes. After service, several families approached with hesitant smiles. Mrs. Baker invited them to Sunday dinner next week. The Cooper children asked if Tohani would join their games. Small gestures, but they carried the weight of acceptance. Like first drops of rain after drought, a new season had begun, one of belonging and hope. Growing as naturally as Clara's garden under the vast Arizona sky, winter crept into the San Pedro Valley like a gentle blanket, softening the hard edges of the desert landscape. Delicate snow crystals dusted the ranch house roof, gleaming in the late afternoon light. Inside Clara's kitchen, warmth radiated from both the wood stove and the hearts gathered around the worn oak table. "Pass the cornbread, please," Nita asked, her voice carrying none of the timidity that had marked her early days with them. Clara handed over the basket, smiling as the girl helped herself to a generous piece. Tohani told a story about his day's work, gesturing with enthusiasm as he described helping Eli repair the last section of fence. "Not a single post loose anymore," he declared proudly. Outside, Dustfire's familiar nicker drifted through the walls. The sound made Eli pause, remembering that morning months ago when he discovered the crushed fence and missing horse. What had seemed like loss had led him down an unexpected path to something precious beyond. Measure Clara folded her hands as the meal drew to a close. "Shall we give thanks?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. They all bowed their heads as her clear voice rose in prayer. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for this roof, and most of all, for Family Found. You brought us together in your wisdom, and we are grateful. Amen." They echoed together. Nita moved closer to Clara, pressing against her side like a sleepy kitten. "I feel safe now," she whispered, though everyone heard. Really and truly safe. Eli stood quietly and stepped out onto the porch. The evening air bit cold against his face as he surveyed his land, transformed by winter into something both familiar and new. Like his heart, he thought. Changed by love he'd never expected to find. When he returned to the kitchen's warmth, it carried Dustfire's well-worn reins. Without ceremony, he placed them in Tohani's startled hands. "These belong to you now, son," he said simply. "You've earned them." The boy's fingers trembled as they closed around the leather, understanding the depth of trust this represented. Clara's eyes shone with approval, while Nita clapped her hands in delight. They bowed their heads once more, a family bound not by blood, but by choice and love. The lamp burned steady and bright, its glow pushing back the winter darkness, illuminating four faces united in belonging. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.